Start. Okay, welcome to Automating Azure with Red Hat CloudForms. I'm Jason Rittenauer. I'd like to thank you, first of all, for deciding to spend the next hour or so of your day with me. I'm going to go ahead and get started here. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and what I do here at Red Hat. I am a cloud success architect, and my official job description, I wear a lot of different hats, but one of the things I do is I work with our customers as they implement our emerging technologies, things like OpenStack, OpenShift, CloudForms, all these things that are extremely complex, and we don't necessarily have a well-defined set of best practices around. I work with them during the proof of concept to architectural to implementation stage, just to make sure that they have a good positive experience and that we capture any feedback they have and it goes back through the proper channels to help improve the products. That's one part of my role. Another thing I do is I evangelize about our cloud products. So I'm glad to be up here standing and talking to you about Red Hat CloudForms right now and some of the cool things we can do with automation and CFME. Also, I may use that term interchangeably, CFME and CloudForms. They're more or less the same thing. So why are we here today? Well, I'm here because I like to talk. And I really like to talk about technology, especially Red Hat technology. And boy, do I love a captive audience. So once they barricade the doors here, you guys are mine for the next hour or so. Now, I'm also genuinely curious about why you guys are here. So just a quick show of hands, who's currently using CloudForms? Okay, who is using Azure? Who's using both together? Who's using neither? So nobody just saw the word, did anybody see the word automation in the title and say, oh, I want to do that? Okay, I get you. You're my kind of people. I like to automate things. Even going back to my days as like a desktop technician, I tried to find as many ways as possible to take those menial day-to-day tasks and streamline them and make it so that I didn't have to click a bunch of things in a GUI or type a bunch of commands over and over. And the reason for that is I wanted to be more efficient with my job. I wanted to be able to work on bigger problems and make more efficient use of my time. I wanted to be able to watch videos of cats doing funny things on YouTube with my time I got back from automating. So that still drives me today even. I mean, today I'm not watching cats on YouTube as much because we've got other sites that are just about doing cat videos. But I still want to automate as much as possible. And I want to help my customers automate as much as they possibly can. And that's one of the great things about Red Hat CloudForms. So here's a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. You can see I do have some time set aside at the end for Q&A, so if you do have any questions that come up, please hold them to the end. My talk goes about 40 to 45 minutes, depending on how much caffeine I've had before I get started, so we should have plenty of time to cover any concerns you have. So first, let's talk about what Red Hat CloudForms is if you're not currently using it. It is our single pane of glass management system for various virtualization infrastructures. Now, we can do both legacy virt types like VMware, Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization, Hyper-V. We can also do more of the cloudy type stuff like, well, obviously OpenStack. And the great thing about OpenStack is we can actually talk to, if you're using Director, we can reach in and talk directly to the Director infrastructure. So we can manage both your overcloud and your undercloud with CloudForms. And of course, public clouds as well, which is Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure. And when I say manage, I mean CloudForms can do just about everything you can think of. We can do full end-to-end lifecycle provisioning of a VM and handle its retirement. We can reach into the file system in a lot of these cases and get a look at, like, say, the SSHD configuration file and verify you're not doing anything like allowing plain text root password login over SSH. So we can do a lot of crazy stuff with CloudForms. We can monitor metrics, and we can then turn that into chargeback reports. So it can do a lot of awesome stuff, my favorite of which, of course, is the automate part. And we're going to get into that in more detail shortly. But first, let's talk about our relationship with Microsoft. This is really, I'm sure we've all had that job interview question where they say, what do you see yourself doing in 5 years? 5 years ago, I definitely never thought I would be at Red Hat Summit talking about Microsoft and Red Hat working together, but here I am. So back in November of last year, we announced a formal partnership with Microsoft. It had been going on behind the scenes for a while before it became public. But out of this, a lot of things have evolved with regards to how Microsoft interacts with Linux and their attitude toward open source. So we're now doing crazy things like running .NET on OpenShift containers. We're talking about running MS SQL Server in Linux very soon. We've got a variety of Red Hat products that work on Azure. So it's really a brave new world as far as what Microsoft is doing with open source, and we're there with them every step of the way. Now, if you're not familiar with Azure specifically, that is, of course, Red Hat or Microsoft's public cloud platform. It supports compute instances, containers, database as a service, storage. It's a really robust platform, and it's undergoing amazing rapid changes. Now, we first added Azure support in CloudForms 4.0, which was generally available back in December of last year. Our initial support was kind of minimal. We were doing inventory of the provider level, so we could see like what VMs you had and that kind of stuff, your zones, your instances, all that sort of stuff. We couldn't really do a whole lot more with it beyond like basic power on, power off operations and some limited provisioning. But we could, of course, run automation against it, which is at least half the battle for us. Now in 4.1, which just became GA today here at Summit, we can do a lot more. We can actually handle the life cycle state of the VM. We can power it on, we can power it off, we can provision it, we can retire it, and everything in between. We can do smart state analysis. That is that feature I alluded to earlier that lets us look inside the file system of your instance and see, what the content of these files are. Do you match a configuration that I specify? We can catch events coming out of the provider, so we can then use those events to automate things. And we can also do metrics gathering, which leads to chargeback. So now is the part we're going to start talking about automation. So this is where it's going to get interesting. Now, again, I'm sure we all have a lot of mundane parts of our job that we'd rather, get somebody else to do it. And a lot of the problems I always encountered as I moved up in the IT world, I found even when I was getting up to like that engineer architect level, I still had to do a lot of the mundane menial tasks just because, they were kind of worried about the lower level guys trying to handle it in case things went sideways. Like, for example, okay, so going back 5 or 6 years ago, I was moving things from bare metal to VMs. I'm sure you guys have all done that sort of thing. Today, I'm having customers say, I want to move my on-premise stuff to the cloud. Not all of it maybe, but some of it. So, and again, they're encountering the same pains we had when we went from bare metal to Vert in the first place. It's like, well, this is a kind of complex thing, and this is an important VM to me. It's a pet, it's not cattle, and I care about it. I want somebody to do it and do it right, and I want to make sure it comes up and everything works. So I'm going to have to get my Tier 3 guys to do this on a maintenance window. Tier 3 guys don't want to do that. We want the Tier 2 guys to do it and call us if anything breaks. What I have done, that I'm going to show you here in a demo later, is I've managed to write an automation method that allows you to select an on-premise VM running on Hyper-V, click a single button in the CloudForms interface, choose a destination storage account, and ship it off to Azure, and it comes up within basically the amount of time it takes to upload your image. So I will be showing you a demo of that shortly. Now, this all comes about because of the support that we've added in the Azure Ruby gem. For those of you not familiar with CloudForms, it is written in Ruby, which, if you're not familiar with Ruby, that's like Python, but not quite as cool. I'm trolling there, guys. But no, Ruby and Python are both great. Of course, CloudForms is written in Ruby. We use things called gems that makes our automation programming a lot more simple. For example, if you've ever written anything against the Azure ARM API, it's pretty verbose. It takes a block of JSON code like this long to get a VM up. The ARM REST gem in CloudForms allows us to simplify that down to a single line. So it can take as much data as I want to give it, but it doesn't need all of that to get a VM up and running. So this is something that, again, it's been in development for a while. It's really undergone a rapid evolution. part of that does come about from our partnership with Microsoft. We actually have their guys working hand in hand with us on a lot of this stuff. So it's been very good to have them helping us because they have interest in seeing the Azure provider in CloudForms mature and make it more widely available to our customers. I should also point out that we don't have any support for the older Service Manager API, and that's mostly because Microsoft is steering everyone away from that. So we're doing our part to try to make everybody use the new and latest and greatest thing. So what kind of stuff should we automate? Well, again, everything. One example I could come up with, and this isn't specific to Azure, but we had a customer who they were doing, so they were one of those government customers that you have your network guys and your system guys, and never the two shall meet. Separation of duties, you couldn't let the system people touch network. I'm sure we've all been there before or heard about it. And we were doing full automation of their VM provisioning in the system side. The network guys wanted to get in on the act because they wanted to automate stuff like, well, the application pools are coming up. I want somebody to automate the load balancers for me. I'm running F5 load balancers. I want that to be automated too. They were under the impression that the only way they could achieve that type of automation was using Puppet Enterprise, because there was actually a module for F5 automation that was only available using the F5 Puppet Enterprise platform. I caught wind of it, and I said, can I try to write some CloudForms automation against this for you? I said, just give me a few days, and if it works, great. I save you some time, some money, some manpower. If not, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Go with Puppet. Within a day, I had an automation method up that was creating the load balancer pool, adding the VMs to it as they were provisioned, and then putting a VIP in front of them. So really with CloudForms and automation, you're only limited by your imagination and your ability with Ruby. And I'm definitely not a developer, so I've got a pretty limited Ruby skill set, and even I could do some crazy cool stuff. So, yeah. So imagine for you Azure users, if you could just go to a single service catalog item, click a button, and then say, I want this resource group to be created, I want this storage account to be created under it, and this network with this IP range. What if you could do that with just those text fields and one button and have a new environment spun up like that? Well, now we're in the automate zone. Here's a mock-up of that type of dialog I was just referring to. Now you can see this is a service catalog item. So what this means is basically I write the Ruby code and then I create a dialog to go with it. And I can hard code as much as I want in there. I can feed that, I can specify fields that I want the input to come from. I can even get variables out of the environment if I want. The bottom line, though, is you write the Ruby, you put something pretty in front of it for the users to interface with, and then you can create whatever resources you want with just a couple clicks. Here's another example. This is actually a automation method that was entered by clicking a VM button. And this is a larger part of the on-prem to cloud migration code I was referring to. And what this does is I have my VM that I've selected there. Let's see if the laser pointer decides to go. So you can see I have a Summit Rail 6 VM. I click the button, my Migrate to Cloud button, which you'll see in my demo coming up. And then it allows me to select my storage account that I want to send this image to. So what it's doing then is it's going to, after that is completed, after I select a storage account, it's going to figure out what Hyper-V host it lives on. It's going to go to that Hyper-V host and say, tell me where this VM's virtual hard disk is living at. And then it's going to take that hard disk and then convert it, upload it to Azure. And it's going to get all those variables from the actual VM's information in the CloudForms database. Do you have to click stuff? Again, how can you watch cat videos if you're having to click stuff in UIs all the time? Well, you don't really have to, because we've got a lot of different ways we can run automation in CloudForms. The first example is the one that I alluded to, having your service catalog item. That's where, again, you write your code, you create a dialog to go with it, and then it's listed in the service portal for your users to order X number of. And again, you can actually lock that down using role-based access. So if you want, say, your developers to be able to create a new environment, but not everybody else, you can just say only the dev group can have access to this. The other example is through a UI button. That's my personal favorite. I like putting buttons all over the place. So if I do have to click something, at least I got my own special button to do it. And then we can do it as a control policy action. So earlier I mentioned smart state, and I talked about how we could look at like the SSHD configuration file and see if we're allowing like plain text root password login. What I could do then is have a policy written that says, I don't want anything to allow root SSH plain text password login, run an automation event in Ansible against it, run this Ansible playbook to fix it for me. So you can see we can actually trigger it that way, and there's no user intervention required at all there. We can also do it in response to an alert or an event. Again, another anecdote from the real world usage. We had another customer that we were creating EAP pools, spun up as services in CloudForms. And again, they had load balancers in front of them and all that good stuff. What they wanted was, their ask was, when aggregate CPU usage in this pool gets above 85%, spin up another node and add it to the pool for me. So what we were able to do then is monitor the actual CPU usage for all these VMs in this pool, get their average. If it was above 85%, new node comes up in a couple minutes. CloudForms also has a REST API, so you can actually call automation against the REST API as well. So you can use something else that's automating things to automate the automate. So you get this real meta, crazy Russian doll thing going on. Voice commands actually started as a joke, but then I got to thinking about it, and I thought, why don't I have a Raspberry Pi laying around? Why don't I try picking up voice commands with that and making calls to the CloudForms API there? So I'm actually going to try that sometime in the next couple weeks. I'll put it up on GitHub if it works. So again, the use case I'm going to show you here is a one-click on-prem to cloud migration. This is really just a generic cloudy picture. I wanted to find something that didn't violate usage rights. So what we're going to do is we are going to run automation against the VM that would ideally live in like an on-prem data center, and click a button in the CloudForms UI, and it would take that image and upload it to Azure where it would spin an instance. Now, a couple questions you might have from this is, number one, would this work on another provider? Yes, it would. The code is currently pretty much tuned to Hyper-V specifically, and I chose that because it was sort of a path of least resistance. The virtual disk format between Hyper-V and Azure is very similar. There is some extra metadata in Hyper-V, which I have to strip off as part of the upload process, but that was easy to automate. That said, I don't see any reason why you couldn't take, like, say, a VM running in Rev and run that through QEMU image convert and then ship that up to Azure. So it is theoretically doable. That's another one of my short-term goals I've got for myself to try to prove out, but I think it would definitely work with other provider types. Would this work with another guest OS? Yes. The actual automation code I'm running in CloudForms is very much operating system agnostic. That part isn't a problem. And the Ansible method I'm running, I actually run an Ansible method that goes through and strips out like machine-specific stuff, like SSH host keys, and like changes drops the UDEV rules and changes the host name back to localhost.local domain. That kind of stuff should work on pretty much any Linux distribution at this point. I do know I would obviously have to do some different stuff for Windows VMs, and I think that's also pretty doable too, especially now that Ansible works within Windows, so I'm going to try that at some point as well. Would this work with another public cloud provider? Yes. Azure has definitely been the easiest to work with as far as I'm concerned, as far as like getting images up there and spinning instances from it. But I don't see any reason why this wouldn't work with Amazon without the appropriate tweaks to address their APIs rather than Azure's. Here's a breakdown of what it takes to actually make this work. So CloudForms can process PowerShell commandlets. I do use that as part of this process. In order to actually execute them, though, I do need a Windows host with WinRM access to that will sort of act as my proxy into the PowerShell methods. So that's what it takes. here's the workflow of how this process actually works. I pick out my VM in the CloudForms UI. I click my Migrate button. And then what happens is CloudForms retrieves the actual list of storage accounts from Azure. From there, once I've selected my storage account, then that's when CloudForms, again, figures out what Hyper-V host it lives on and goes and asks the Hyper-V host, how do you get to your virtual hard disk for this VM? And then it converts that as part of the automation, it does actually shut down the VM. I do have to point that out. So you do have to down the VM to do this. So it shuts the VM down, converts it from VHDX to VHD. Then it actually uploads it to Azure and creates an instance from it. And all of this, the actual automation process can run inside of about 5 minutes. The big limiting factor is going to be how big is your pipe to the internet. I'm working on 10 meg upload cable at home, so it took about 12 minutes for a 1 gig image. Even before that, when I started writing this, I only had 10 meg DSL, which had 1 meg up. So you can imagine how painful that was to try to upload even a 1 gig image. So I did a lot of proof of concepts with Ceros. So here is where I'm going to actually show you the demo. So let me just get out of my slides here. And move this over to the other tab. And just a second here. All right. So you can see here is my CloudForms UI. I do have my Summit Rails 6 VM running on a Hyper-V host. The actual choice to use Rails 6 versus Rails 7 was, again, just trying to keep my image size down, but it should work on just about any Linux distribution. Again, I'm pointing out that it is Hyper-V. And you can see my migration button up there in the right, just above the Rails 6 name instance. I'm going to mouse up to that in a second. And when I click that migration button, it's going to bring down another drop-down that actually says Migrate to Azure. But before I do that, I'm going to do this little thing. This is going to show you that this is the actual VM image, that they're one and the same. I've got an Apache service here that just says Hello Summit. I'm going to do a date stamp, and then I'm going to pipe that through SHA to get like kind of a unique fingerprint, so to speak. And then I'm going to paste that into my index once I get that out. I was typing Shatner, by the way. I was listening to William Shatner spoken word albums. Good working music. So you can see my first 4 digits are BE21. My last 4 are B9C2. So remember that for later. I am going to drop this into my index right now, do a curl localhost. And when we get this instance spun up on Azure, it will have that same block of string there. So now I'm going to go back over to the CloudForms UI and actually start my migration process. And you can see this is going to bring up a dialog box that is going to ask me what storage account I want to drop this into. And you'll notice here, this is my CloudForms automation log. You can see where it pulled out my names from my storage account that's associated with my Azure subscription, and that does populate that dialog box in real time. So there's actually 2 automation methods here going on. There is one to get the storage accounts, and then there's going to be, of course, the one that actually does the upload process. And you can see after I click submit, that's where that actually begins. So first, this is running an Ansible playbook. We're going to drop over to my Ansible Tower web page. And you'll see this is going to run some instructions to prepare the host for migration. It's, again, going to wipe out like the persistent UDEV rules, the change the host name, get all that stuff ready so it's more prepared to get its identity changed, so to speak. Yes, yes. That is another good point. You do need the Windows Azure agent to make everything friendly to prepare for a Azure migration, and that is part of the Ansible playbook. So here's an RDP session into my Hyper-V host. I am just dumping everything into the root of C as like a temporary working area, but there is my Summit Rel 6 VHD image without the metadata on it, so it's the VHD rather than the VHDX format. It's going to take about a minute or so, if that, and then it'll be fully up to the, it'll inflate to the proper size, 927 megs just about. And then once that's done, the actual upload process is going to begin. Now, I don't really have a whole lot of pretty logging for that at this point, so I'm going to do a time jump here. Again, it took about 12 minutes in my home environment, but in about, and we're going to do some other stuff in the UI before we do the time jump. I'm going to actually go over and show you the Azure UI in a second, so you can see that the image has been in the process of being uploaded to a bucket, or blob as they're called, on the Azure environment. And you can see there's my Summit Rel 6 VHD. At least the process has started. And again, this is just a matter of your speed to the internet, how long this part actually takes. I can only imagine what it's like with like 100 megs up or a gig. You could do some pretty big, hefty VMs that way, pretty quick. And here's the time jump. You can see it's completed. It got about 9.6 megs throughput, I think it was. And I'm going to do a refresh on the Azure provider, and you can see I now have a running copy of that, that image that I uploaded. It's got a UUID in there appended to the name to make it unique. And then we're going to go over to the CloudForms UI. Well, first we're going to do a refresh and actually see that we have the instance in the process of coming up. And then we'll go take a look over at the CloudForms UI, and we will see this instance show up in Azure, in the Azure provider after we do a refresh. So that's under the clouds providers. Go to my Azure provider, and you can see it. So it still needs to be manually refreshed. It doesn't display any running instances. So I'm going to do a provider refresh, trigger that, and then do a UI refresh, and then it will show my instance there. Now, another really neat thing, just as an addendum here. So prior to Summit, Hyper-V did not support smart state analysis, so we weren't able to reach into the file system for Hyper-V VMs. However, it now does. So if I would have had access to that beta code, I would have done a smart analysis of the VM prior to upload, and then I'd be able to show you like an actual drift configuration so you could see the differences between the original VM and the VM that came up, and it would be pretty much none other than like maybe the SSH keys and that kind of stuff. So we're going to go back over and take another look at my VM. I'm going to get access to the public DNS name. Just going to copy that out and then paste it in so I can SSH into it. Go back over to another terminal window. I'm going to dump my cached copy of the local SSH key just because I had been doing a couple test runs of this and forgot to do that prior to kicking off this process. So I'm going to SSH in as the cloud user, and it will ask me to verify the fingerprint. I'm going to go in and I'm going to curl my Apache service, and we will see that it has that same string there. So that is our, well, 3-click, because we have to pick the storage account and click submit again, but 2 to 3 click migration from on-prem to Azure using CloudForms. And again, it took me about 20 minutes for that test run. So, let me close this out. this back up. So here's my personal roadmap, and this is unfortunately a thing I'm doing in my spare time and not really a part of my job per se. So I want to, again, make sure that this is 100% Linux distribution agnostic. I realize some people are using Debian and Ubuntu and all that kind of stuff. Why would you want to when you got RHEL, right? But I'm going to make sure it works on those guys. I want to make it work in Windows because I know that's probably a big use case for Azure users. I want to integrate this with satellite. That's actually something I was showing this to some colleagues, and they're like, what about licensing? How are we going to handle that? I'm like, oh, yeah, that fun part. Because I've manually got it like doing an unregister from satellite and then re-register once it gets up there. So what I'd like to do is streamline that process a bit more. And then make more dynamic dialogues, because I want to be able to ask for more stuff than like just what storage account do you want to put it in. So I want to know, like, do you want to put it in this resource group or create a new one or that kind of stuff? So yeah, I definitely want to make it as dynamic as possible. Exactly. Exactly, yeah. I want to get all of that stuff to where it's either you pick an existing one or you create one on the fly as needed. Further out, I want to support more of the different infrastructure providers. Probably more public clouds. I know I've got some users that would like to see this in Amazon Web Services as well. And then the other big thing that I haven't tried yet, and I'm 99% sure it wouldn't work, is VMs with multiple disks. So I need to figure out how to get over that roadblock. But other than that, that's pretty much it for me. Here's how you can connect with me after the fact if you want. I'm on GitHub. I'm going to put this up on GitHub probably tonight or tomorrow. I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm somewhat active in the Manage IQ community, and I'm trying to become more active as I get time. So again, thank you all for listening to me for the past 45 minutes or whatever, and I'm up here if you want to talk.